I bet this has happened to you, especially if you've been around toddlers who are not really enthusiastic with potty training. It goes something like this. You're minding your own business and you're, what's that smell? Hey, where's Junior? Anyone seen Junior? Whose turn was it to watch Junior? Junior is unusually quiet. And you go looking around, and there he is behind the couch, sitting down, not moving. And another nasal inspection helps you to see, yeah, he really has been sitting in his own filth, and you want to relieve him of that. And he's screaming with indignation and absolutely no cooperation because he's not down with the program of being cleaned up and uh, learning how to do things right and be part of the civilized community. Let's change that a little bit. Rather than follow your nose to see where the mess is, what happens if you were going to follow the money? And rather than looking for an uncooperative toddler, you started listening to the statements and actions of, shall we say, more senior ranks of the Catholic cadre of the people who should really know better club. What would happen next? Stay with me. I got a story to tell. I'm Jesuit Father Robert McTeigue, your host every day of the Catholic Current, coming to you from the Station of the Cross Catholic Media Network. Let's take a closer look. Glad you're here. On Monday, I talked about what does Caesar want from us? Well, he wants our cooperation and ultimately our capitulation in exchange temporarily for the gold in its various forms. Let's take that image and add to it a little phrase in Latin, cui bono, which means roughly who benefits. This is another way of saying follow the money. Whenever there's legislators that have a great idea, you got to find out who is paying him to promote that. I mean, at least with car racing, you've got the emblems and the decals and so on. You know who's paying the bills. So there's no conflict of interest. I've done a lot of work in medical ethics, and I know when you speak at a medical ethics conference or you're printing medical research, you're supposed to declare potential conflicts of interest. Are you evaluating, for example, a drug when the study is being paid for by the drug manufacturer? That's a conflict of interest. So you've got to ask, cui bono, who benefits? Follow the money. Now, what happens when senior churchmen step up to the microphone and the camera and start talking about not necessarily spiritual matters or the afterlife, but talk about very practical matters, matters of policy? Well, okay, corporal works of mercy, that's fine. Uh, if senior churchmen come out very strongly against a pro abortion regime, the funding of abortion and contraceptives, that's fine. I'm 100% okay with that. That's legit. That's obviously in harmony with the gospel. There's no conflict of interest. But what happens when senior churchmen begin to wax eloquent about welcoming the stranger and the migrant and huddled masses yearning to breathe free? We might have to ask cui bono. Now, these senior churchmen, they may be genuinely motivated by gospel rooted compassion, and they see that Christ suffers in the poor, and they love Christ so much, a love rooted in word and sacrament, that it is unbearable to them that Christ should suffer alone in the poor. So they reach out with compassio, true compassion, to suffer with the poor Christ and the poor. But we're on 100% solid ground. No issue with that at all. But when we begin to wax eloquent about welcoming the stranger and the migrants as missionaries of hope and changing the face of the church and welcome, 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 and todos, 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 and then you say, hey, Uncle Sam giving you anything for that? Caesar giving you anything for that? Are you taking on the function of a non-governmental organization, an NGO, where you get administrative costs per head for each stranger that you welcome before plugging them into a taxpayer funded social safety net? Asking for a friend. Here's my concern. is that when churchmen uh, advocate for public policies in which they may have a financial interest and they don't disclose that financial interest, that undermines their credibility. And credibility is very precious. Bishops, to give a Catholic example, have very significant moral authority by virtue of their office. And because I love Christ and the church he founded, I love the hierarchical structure of the church, I acknowledge bishops' obligation by virtue of their office, by virtue of their ordination, to teach, to sanctify, and to govern. 100% on board with that. But I want to know, I think you want to know too, is there a conflict of interest? Is there anything about their enthusiasm for one policy or another that involves the diocese or the organizations that they sponsor getting some cash from Uncle Sam? Let's talk a little bit about credibility for a moment. This is not anything unique to me. This goes all the way back to Aristotle and his treatment of rhetoric. He talks about the means of persuasion, and there's logos, ethos, and pathos. The logos is the truth. If you're not telling the truth, that's not rhetoric, that's being a shyster, that's being a crook, that's demagoguery. And so when a churchman wax eloquence about what the church teaches regarding the poor and the immigrant and the stranger, that's fine. Tell that truth. I only ask that you tell the whole truth. Tell the whole truth about what the church also teaches regarding the right of nations to enforce the rule of law, to have sound borders, to have a concern for the sake of its own native born citizens for who comes into the country. And that's a matter of principle. We also have to tell truth in light of matter of fact. We have to really talk about those who come into the country illegally and commit horrific crimes, sex trafficking vulnerable people into the country, bringing deadly drugs into the country, setting up gangs in the country, raping, robbing, and murdering. That costs lives and that costs taxpayer funding. And if we're going to talk about welcoming the stranger, our credibility demands that we tell the shadow side of an uncritically welcoming, borderless approach to immigration. And for all the photographs of senior churchmen walking with people to court and being in solidarity, I haven't seen very many pictures of senior churchmen being photographed with people who've been victims of horrific crimes committed by people who've been deported time and time again, only to be released back into the United States. I don't see them presiding at the funerals of people who've been murdered by people who shouldn't have been in the country in the first place. I wonder why that is. Maybe I'm looking in the wrong place. If you can find those photographs, contact me directly at thestationofthecross.com/askfather. So we have to tell the truth, which is all the principles relevant from church teaching, both welcoming the stranger and the right of a country to enforce its borders. And we have to tell the factual truth that there is a downside to thoughtless immigration. Not only the crime from criminals who come here with criminal intent, but also the effect on economy, education, healthcare, tax policy. These same senior churchmen who wax eloquent about welcoming the stranger and huddle masses yearning to breathe free while skimming some administrative cost off the top as they're part of the welcome wagon, they don't say very much about what this does to the tax burden of especially younger Americans, citizens, taxpayers who want to start small businesses and families precisely because the tax burden is so heavy, precisely because the economy, especially at the lower echelons, has been weakened by a flood of unvetted immigrants. Native born Americans are disincentivized from starting families and starting small businesses. These numbers are not in dispute, and I don't hear senior clergy talking about that at all. I wonder why that is. And again, if I'm wrong, you can contact me, leave a note in the comments section. So, logos, the truth. If we're telling the incomplete truth in terms of principles and facts, that undermines credibility. So that's the logos. And then in terms of pathos, emotion, I see again very many pictures of clergymen having Mass at the border, putting the Blessed Sacrament through a hole in the fence at the border wall. Aw, kind of gets you in the feels, doesn't it? But no photographs of burying murder victims. No photographs of visiting destroyed property and ransacked homes. So why do they push one tragic depiction emotionally laden, but not the other side? One wonders. And finally, ethos. That's street cred. That's the reputation for moral authenticity. If I'm advocating for a policy and not disclosing that I have a financial interest in advocating that policy, doesn't that undercut my credibility? Precisely because moral authority is so precious and moral authority functions well in an atmosphere of moral credibility, we have to be careful about what we say, how we say it, and what we leave unsaid. I know that sounds like a lot of work, and it might even slow down the juggernaut of what so many prominent Catholics like to talk about, the movement of social justice. But I'm already bumping into the time limit I set for myself for this little project. So I'm going to invite you to join me on the Catholic Current, the stationofthecross.com, our iCatholic Radio mobile app, or your favorite podcast platform this Friday, October 10th at 5 p.m. Eastern, where I'm going to address the question, who needs social justice? Meanwhile, think on these things today. Take them to prayer and talk about it with those you love. Go in peace, and please do pray for me, for I am a sinner. Thanks for watching today. I release new videos on Mondays and Wednesdays. Check out the archives for more videos. You can listen to my podcast at stationofthecross.com, and you can find my written work at heraldofthegospel.org. See you next time.